So we have with us Dr. Kirstin Siex, who is the director of the USAID Africa Bureau, who is going to be telling us about the work they are doing. And just to let you know again, and big shout out to the USAID, because your work is what inspired this symposium to be held. It is the white paper, the report of the study that USAID funded that resulted in this. So thank you so much for your work. And I know you're also there in APAC in Rwanda. I hope you are enjoying your stay there. I think the computer is muted. All right, there we go.
You think after working, 2+ years online all the time, we would figure out the mute button, but it takes time, right? My name is Kirstin Siex, as Israel said, and I'm the Senior Biodiversity Advisor for U.S. Agency for International Development's Africa Bureau. And, I really want to thank you for the invitation to join you today. I really just couldn't be more delighted to join you this evening in Kigali, morning in Nevada, for the African Diaspora Biodiversity Symposium. It's especially exciting given exactly what Israel just said about the genesis of this session, that it comes from a study that we supported from USAID through our partnership with the African Biodiversity Collaborative Group, which is ABCG. So for those of you who don't know the U.S. Agency for International Development, you might be surprised by our very kind of large footprint in biodiversity conservation as a development agency. So I think, myself as a young conservationist in Africa 30 years ago, I was really surprised to see this large presence of AID in biodiversity conservation in Africa, and that has just grown over the last decades. So USAID is the largest US government biodiversity donor in Africa, and we're one of the largest donors to biodiversity conservation overall across Africa. So in our fiscal year 2021, we programmed about $317 million to biodiversity conservation globally across 60 countries. And of that, 123 million was within Africa. And that was programmed through 13 bilateral missions and the 4 regional missions. So our coverage is quite broad across sub-Saharan Africa. And interestingly, these are congressionally allocated funds. So, we are incredibly unfortunate with the US government that we actually always have received bipartisan and bicameral support for biodiversity conservation from the US Congress. So you might be surprised to learn that the International Conservation Caucus is one of the largest caucuses on the Hill, one of the largest partisan caucuses on the Hill. So even when they can't decide and agree on anything else, they do agree on biodiversity conservation, and it's important. So we're pretty lucky that way. And I think that USAID is unique as a biodiversity donor because we are not a standalone conservation organization, but rather we sit within kind of a much larger development organization. So we can bring together multiple funding streams. We can bring together cross-sectoral approaches to conservation across Africa. And I think, great examples of this is our conservation work in Ghana and in Senegal, where we are using both biodiversity funds and Feed the Future money to work on fisheries and to work on marine conservation in these countries. So the organizers of the symposium asked me to kind of mention a little bit about the capacity building work that we do across USAID and the work that we do on capacity building for science, for policy, for practice. And I guess I would start by saying that, capacity building for us really is across the boards, and it is fundamental to the work that we do in Africa. So we build capacity of government, we build capacity of communities, of civil society organizations. We work with women, with youth, with indigenous communities. And mostly this is to implement best practices in biodiversity conservation and sustainable natural resource management. So we really believe that biodiversity conservation is core to development, that sustainable natural resource management is the core to inclusive development. And our work is guided by our biodiversity policy at USAID, which has the dual goal of conserving priority biodiversity across the globe and also increasing biodiversity conservation into all facets of development. But in addition to our role of capacity building, this is all, like I say, focused on best practices in biodiversity conservation, but our role is also to work with our implementing partners on the ground, with the governments we work with our community organizations to test and to develop and to distribute tools and methodologies for best practices and to deal with the challenges that we are facing across Africa in conservation. And we do this by working with scores of implementing partners across the globe. And a great number of this work, and a great example, I think, of this work is the work that we do with the African Biodiversity Collaborative Group. So ABCG is currently, it's changing, and you'll hear a lot about that, I'm sure. It's a consortium of the 7 largest US-based conservation NGOs working in Africa. And what they do is they leverage the knowledge, the skills, and the reach of all of these NGOs to jointly develop and test and distribute tools and methodologies to deal with some of the most thorny conservation challenges in Africa. At ABCG, what you guys are saying about being African-led, those things really resonate with ABCG, and what they're doing is they're currently expanding. They're bringing in new African-based members, and they're also bringing in new African leadership. So really, I think we're all kind of leaning forward in this way, as all of you are saying, into the importance of this being African-led and everything that we're doing. But in addition to kind of the development, testing, and scaling of best practices and capacity building, I wanted to mention our role in knowledge management and learning. And what Edwin said, he's sitting right beside me here, really resonated with me, in the importance of kind of knowledge management and getting and sharing the information that is being developed in Africa with Africans across the globe, and what kind of role the diaspora might play in that. And so we are really kind of prioritizing at USAID, are collaborating, we're prioritizing learning and adaptive management. And we do this again across all the boards, across everywhere where we work. And it really starts for us with these kind of individual projects where we support having really robust monitoring, evaluation, and learning frameworks that serve as the basis for adaptive management for all of the activities we support. But then we also invest in learning groups and distributing learning across sites, across regions, and across continents. I would direct you to our website, the biodiversitylinks.org, and I can send that to you, and Israel, you can get that out to the rest of our colleagues. And there you're going to find we have multiple collaborative learning groups. So here we're working with all of our missions on the ground, with all of our implementing partners, and we have multiple learning groups. We have one on combating wildlife trafficking and trade. We have one on combating conservation crimes. There is one on conservation enterprises. So how do we actually develop and implement enterprises that benefit conservation? Private sector engagement, and this is somewhere I think we should be engaging the diaspora a lot more. On wild meat is another one, so wild sources of protein, and then on marine conservation, sustainable fisheries. And then I guess my last comment is just that, I'm incredibly inspired by everything I've heard today. I think that your timing is perfect. I think we really all need to lean in and to better leverage the African diaspora. We at USAID, I mentioned, we partner with our NGOs, we partner with academic institutions. We tap into our domestic institutions at the US governments. We tap into, for example, the Department of the Interior to bring in and provide technical experts for conservation work in Africa. Why can't we do the same with the African diaspora? Why aren't we tapping into those networks through academic institutions, through the private sector? So I think, as everyone has articulated, there is really no shortage of need for capacity building. There's no shortage of need for mentoring, for research support to young African scientists, to academics, to government researchers, to communities, to women, youth, and indigenous groups. So I really think I'm delighted to hear what everyone is saying, and I really think the time is now to move forward on these issues. So thank you for giving me this time, and really delighted to be part of this group and discussing this issue with you tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siex.